we are live, and I'm just going to do this, media assets, and okay, that was pretty good. It's a hot little beat. Yo, 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 yo. How's everyone doing? Hope everyone's doing well. It is Thursday, January 16th, I guess it is. It's just moments after 2 o'clock in the Eastern time zone. So that means that it's time for the Almanac Live. This is the second edition. So I want to thank everyone for coming by, taking some time to hang out with us today. So some of you may remember we did this maybe about a month ago, I guess, December 10th is when we did our first one. It was a big splash event. We had a lot of the authors who were joining us, as well as some of the original PMs on the project as well, to talk about it. So this is part two. So part two of what? Well, this is the HTTP Archive Web Almanac Live. And how this started? Well, the Web Almanac's been around for, I think, since 2019. And a couple of years after the first few editions, we talked about potentially having the Almanac sort of like live in a way where we can have the authors come out and really talk about the chapters. Something just beyond, reading a book, really. Because I felt like at times the Almanac, amazing as it was just sort of like completed. And it felt like a book that was just being put on the shelf of a library. Well, we want to do a little more. We want to talk about the chapters. We want to talk to the authors of the chapters and, how they felt about some of the data that they found, some of the stuff that they were surprised about, some things that really fell in line with what they expected. I don't know. It could be a number of things. Either way, welcome. So what we're going to do is get into the Almanac. And for those who don't know what the Web Almanac is, let's get into it. So the Web Almanac really was kind of like, the mission was to combine the raw stats and trends of the HTTP Archive with the expertise of the web community. So what are these trends? Well, the web really is very vast. And there's a lot of data out there sort of like showing us what the web is all about. And that's what the Web Almanac was here to expose. Specifically, it's a comprehensive report on the state of the web backed by real data and trusted web experts. We're going to talk to a lot of these web experts today, and they're going to talk about a lot of the data that they found. Now, the Web Almanac, first of all, I'm going to go in and share a link for those who may not be familiar with it. So if you go into the comments, you'll see it right now. Boom. So you can go out and start reading it. But for those who are not familiar with the Web Almanac, it's made up of 21 chapters in 4 parts. And one of the parts is page content. We had some of the authors from part 1, I think, in our first stream. And this time around, I think we have at least one. And we also have part 2, which is user experience, which we're going to cover as well in a couple of chapters. We also have part 3, which was content publishing. And the 4th part, which was content distribution. We also have a few authors from that part as well today. Now, in terms of the chapters that we are going to cover, we're going to start with, well, not start, but in no particular order. We're going to have SEO. We're going to look also at the HTTP, fantastic chapter, one of my faves, very detailed. And also, we're going to talk about privacy, third parties, and as well cookies. Now, I want to say we're going to talk about cookies. We may or may not, so I'll double check on that. But either way, I thought something that might be interesting is, especially with the last 3 chapters, the sort of like correlation between third parties, cookies, and privacy could be pretty interesting. But we'll let the chapter authors talk about that. Now, let's start to introduce everyone. Oh, I guess I should start with myself. My name's Henri. I'm a friend of the HP Archive, longtime supporter of the project. And I came aboard this time around to help out with these streams because I thought it'd be really interesting to have this and speak to some of the authors. So that being said, I'm going to bring up some of the authors in no particular order. And I'm going to start with, hold on, I'm going to click here. Jamie, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Hey.
Amazing. Thanks for joining us. And you're coming from whereabouts? What part of the world?
I'm located in Denver, Colorado.
Awesome. And tell us about yourself real quickly.
I am the Director of Technical SEO at Cox Automotive. I write a newsletter called Rich Snippets, big old nerd, and repeat offender with the Web Almanac. Started back in 2020.
Okay.
And I've helped in 4 editions now.
Well, fantastic. Thank you for your service, as we like to say. And now we're going to bring in someone else, Max. How are you doing, Max?
Hi, everybody. Doing great.
Awesome. And whereabouts are you coming from?
Was born in Ukraine, and now I stay in Germany, in Berlin in particular.
Okay, awesome.
I'm living there with my family.
Perfect. And, tell us about your background.
The background is, come from economics and mathematics background, but I've been lucky to work with a number of marketing technology and advertising technology. So I'm a fan of data, scalable systems, and privacy. And that's what we'll be talking about today.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us as well. All right. So next up on stage, I'm going to bring up Monsieur Marx, Robin. How you doing?
Boxed in,
right?
I guess. But
more
than that, very well.
I'm going to do it.
Much better. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. These layouts, sometimes they get a little funny.
Yeah. I'm calling in from Belgium. Good old Belgium. 8 p.m. at night. I am a web performance specialist at Akamai, one of the big CDNs. I am one of the few people I think who could say they have a PhD in web performance, which it's always a fun thing to do. So yeah, I've been around the block with the web performance community for quite a while now, focusing on the protocols and the impact that has on page loading. Also repeat offender on the Web Almanac. I love that word, offender, because that is very accurate.
Right. Well,
we're talking about the Almanac, yeah.
Well, thank you for joining us. And I guess, somehow a repeat offender has some time off from jail. So glad that you can join
That'll
us.
do it again.
All right. Next up, let's bring Yash to the stage. Where are you? Oh, there you are. How are you doing? Oh, your mic's off, by the way.
Hi, everyone. I'm Yash.
Awesome. So where are you coming from, and what brings you here?
Originally, I'm from India, but currently I'm located in Davis, California on the West Coast.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And if I'm not mistaken, you are in the middle of some deep studies.
Yeah, so I'm currently pursuing my PhD in computer science at UC Davis. And the main focus of my research is on web privacy and security from the perspective of understanding online advertising and tracking.
Okay. All right. Well, Yash is going to have the nuggets for us today, folks. Rest assured, And last but not least, let's go a little further along and let's welcome Mikhail. Mikhail, how are you doing?
I'm very good.
Excellent, excellent. So where are you coming from and what brings you here?
I'm from Brazil and I'm based in Brazil.
Excellent, excellent. And professionally, what do you do?
Well, I have a background in computer science, but I passed the last 10 years working with digital marketing, especially SEO.
Mhm.
And now I'm taking a post bachelor. I believe that in data science.
Awesome, awesome.
So,
Well, thank you for joining us. So, and glad to have you here. So, as I mentioned, we were supposed to have a cookies chapter. I do not believe she was able, or maybe she might be late. I'm not sure. I don't see any messages in Slack. So, right now, we are cookie-less. Believe it or not, no sweets for this stream. That being said, let's really get into it. Let's start with SEO because I know Jamie and Mikael both worked on the chapter together, and the point of this whole stream is to really have these conversations about the chapters. The things that you found really interesting around some of the data that you were looking at. So, I mean, I'll let you kind of take the wheel and start.
Do you want to go first? Do you want me to ramble about this? Because I'm happy to.
Certainly, Jamie, go ahead since you have the mic. And, you're
Miguel's
basic.
so polite and nice to me. Hi. So the SEO chapter this year was the biggest version that we've ever had. It was the most in depth, and it gave light to some incredible things. Seeing the differences between a homepage and an inner page, huge gap in the behaviors. My favorite thing I learned though was our robots TXTs, these files that we use to go ahead and control search engine indexing, suddenly have a lot more meaning, a lot more application to them. So seeing them become more adopted, seeing more declarations, especially as they relate to AI crawlers. I know the Internet Architecture Board just had a hackathon talking about how to deal with crawlers, so I'm excited to see how that'll evolve in the future. The counterpart to the robots TXT is meta robots directives, and we use them all the time. No index, no follow. Turns out the ones we use the most aren't real. So there are two robots directives, follow and index, which are just default values. But when you declare them, they do nothing. And they are the most declared of all of them. So it was really interesting to see that gap.
I remember I'd seen, I'd gone through so many of the chapters, but I know one part that sort of caught me off guard. I think it was something like 10 or 15% of robot TXTs were like 404s.
Yeah. Non 200 is about 15%.
Now,
which is wild. You're like, no, we're just gonna let happen what will happen. Godspeed to you.
Right.
But with the directives declared on page, you can declare them per a search engine user agent. And people got very specific. They were actually curating the tags to provide the search experience they wanted relative to the user agent. So Bing, no archive means nothing to most crawlers. But for Bing, it says don't use this in AI answers. And that was, 1% for a generic bot and 64% declaration for that Bing bot.
Mm-hmm. Now, I know that, Mikael and I had spoken about this a couple of times, and, I was very curious as well. And Mikael, if you could chime in potentially, like, I talked about the idea because, you're in Brazil and, the world is huge and vast. And I talked about the idea of, SEO potentially be different, across geos, did you see any of that in sort of like your findings, especially being in Brazil and you may have a particular scope?
Yes, particularly the better school of SEO that we study is based on US. It's the most competitive market, definitely. But when we see, for example, in Brazil, I have been working for 10 years with international companies interested on apply their websites in Brazil. And normally they come from with the mindset of US. very aggressive to optimize a lot of things, and they are not interested in localize their content, only to translate it. But we have cultural differences. Basically, for example, football and soccer, they're different. And I already managed a website that have snowboarding for Brazil. That's impossible ski. And particularly SEO works in we have a delay between that is practice in US from the rest of the world. Basically, for example, if you have a post from Google today in English, we need to wait, I don't know, 5-10 days to read the same document in Portuguese, for example. So we have a long delay in terms of learning and understanding about SEO. And I believe that since last year, from AI improvements, the people are using a lot AI in Brazil to check the content basically in real time. For example, Reddit. And now I believe that this year, this delay will be less than we have seen during these years.
Okay. And so ultimately what you're saying, and I'm sure people, would realize, but, just to sort of like affirm, having, SEO will definitely have particular deltas across the globe simply because, the US is where it's at, and then the rest of the globe sort of like catches on. Is that correct?
Even feature rollouts take longer. They start in the US.
I got you. What is something that, is there something that, was really shocking in terms of like some of the findings, during the sort of, the crawling that, we did for this chapter? Say, Mikael.
Okay. Well, I checked a lot the section about internationalization, and I never take some time to study, for example, other search engines, because essentially we are focused on Google, made more or less on Bing. But when I checked the data, I don't saw, for example, that Mandarin was not the first internationalization data. Well, I try to understand why. And I passed, I don't know, 4 days interviewing a lot of people on China, South Korea to understand Naver, in Russia to understand their own search engine. And these markets are so closed that you can see the data. For example, Mandarin is the large language in the world, but in terms of internationalization, we don't have nothing at the data. Why? Because basically you need to at their search engine, you need to be a native. You need to host your website at their own servers on China, not in US, basically. So they don't need hreflang, for example. So this is a challenge, for example, in writing content for this chapter. You need to read a lot, check a lot of the documentations, checking news about a lot of things. I don't know, to write one line or one paragraph. So based on that, you need you receive a lot because you are studying a lot of things to ensure that the data is correct.
Gotcha. Well, that's part of, the deep diving that we do, that the authors do over at for the Web Almanac, so that we can pull out some of this sort of like surprising information that most people may not know. Once again, I took a link of the to the SEO chapter, and I've dropped that into the chat, I guess, the comment section. Is that what it's called? Yeah. And so if anyone's really familiar, curious about that chapter, you can go ahead and click that and see what exactly it is that they've done. Now, what is something that you feel for the SEO chapter? I'll bring this to Jamie, that maybe was not covered, or you didn't have enough time or enough data that you'd like to see maybe for next edition in 2025?
I'm not sure how to pull this off, but I think there's opportunities, especially because SEO is a sum of the parts thing. So we talk about things like security, we talk about things like cookies and performance. I would love to be able to collaborate more with those teams as they find interesting things. Right? Like this chapter is a lot of like, no, go read this one. It's going to be really useful and helpful. Let's talk about HTTP. Let's talk about these things. But more co-conspirators.
Right. I got you. And and I'm bringing this up again. I just feel like the HB Archive's Web Almanac is such a trove of data and about the web. And at the end of the day, like the web, there's a lot of like moving parts, and there's a lot of overlap. And I think that even between all the chapters here, there might be a little bit of info that applies between each other. So that's what I think is super fascinating about this project, is that there could be a play of just talking about performance and SEO and how they sort of like work together. Now, since we have been talking a little bit about performance, or at least it was mentioned a couple of times, Robin, I'm going to bring you on and have you sort of break down what it's like to sort of like look at a chapter or pen a chapter like the HTTP, and especially coming from your angle, having sort of like the expertise from the studies and even just working at Akamai. How would you go about just even starting to explain that?
I have some experience in this, doing it for a while. Especially this year was easier because you can assume by now that people know the basics, I guess, or at least I did, which wasn't true other years. And I could go a little bit deeper in explaining some of the nuances. The most difficult thing to explain this year was that it's not trivial to really measure how much HTTP3 we're seeing in the data set, because the way the Web Almanac data is measured actually hides a lot of HTTP3 on the web by design. So again, difficult to explain, but I'm going to try. Browsers will not do HTTP3 out of their own. They have to be told by the web server that HTTP3 is supported, and only then are they going to try it. So basically, they're only going to try it from the second page load onward. The problem is the HTTP archive only loads one page.
Right.
So you basically never know that something could do HTTP3. So we have to like look at, I would say, other artifacts, like the announcements of HTTP3 that you receive, and then try and derive the adoption levels from that, which, is doable, isn't 100% correct. But so trying to explain that in a concise manner that makes sense to layman, that was the most difficult part for me this year. Especially because this year it wasn't just that. We had a second. We now have a second method of announcing HTTP3 through DNS, which is even more complex than the original one. And then trying to hopefully make people make sense of that was challenging. I hope I succeeded, but yeah.
And you say trying to let me pull back. Saying people, you're trying to get past the initial, few years of just, very basic understanding of HTTP. Is there something that people were getting wrong that you remember from those past years that might make things a little bit easier to explain this time around?
Like this year, you can drop all the pretense of talking about server push. For example, right? Because it's very clear now that it's dead, and you don't even have to pretend anymore that people still want to use it or look at the data for that. So you can bypass all of that, all of those things. You have other things like really comparison with HTTP1 also isn't that necessary anymore, because that is going down and down more and more, mostly being used for site stuff instead of real stuff. So that's the kind of stuff that people sometimes got confused by, I guess, that we now no longer need to really delineate as much as we used to. choose to in the past. But there was a ton of things, especially in the beginning, that people misinterpreted what HTTP3 is, what it does, what is quick, how does that work, why does it run over the UDP? So many stupid comments over the years on things like Hacker News you wouldn't believe.
Okay.
But yeah, now we can we've moved past that kind of stuff.
I mean, there are a couple of things I'd like to sort of highlight there. You're talking about H1 or H1.1. Do you see a time where that is really going to be, say, like single digits? Because I'm actually still a little surprised at the still large, adoption and or use of it.
I touched on this a little bit in the chapter as well. Maybe single digits, but there will always be a place for H1. I think on the web, a large part of that has to do with the complexity of HTTP2 and especially 3. Very complex to set up on your own. So we see for HTTP3, for example, total adoption is around 30%. 85% of that is CDNs and big deployments. 85%, just those, because it's so difficult to run your own HTTP3 server. This is partially true for HTTP2 as well. So you will see that a lot of do-it-yourselfers, self-hosters, whatever, they will keep using HTTP1, as is their right, as it should be able to do, in my opinion. Which is a good part of the web, It allows, it's very democratizing, I guess. Even if you only know about HTTP 1.1, you can still host your website and get your content out there. So yeah, people sometimes also ask you, is HTTP3 ever gonna, take over the entire web? No, there will always be a place for H1 and H2 for those reasons. And like I said, it's a good thing that this one part that I highlighted in the chapter there as well is the growing centralization of the web through the big CDNs, through the big companies, right? You think of the internet distributed system, but really it's like 20 big companies that see 75% of all data, and not only see it, they can also decrypt it and could potentially look at it or leak data to attackers, which is maybe not the best approach long term.
Right.
But the positive upside of all of that is that you can get a lot of adoption of new things like HTTP3 very quickly. Right, the fact that 30% adoption is possible within 2 years is only because of those big centralized hubs. So yeah, kind of like a balance.
Yeah. And the fact that and this is what I love about the archive as well. The Web Almanac, is that we can be introduced to challenges and the complexities of some of these new protocols and why these rates of adoption are as they are right now, and why people will hold on to like 1.1. But ultimately, it sounds like a lot of the H2, H3 adoption is, as you said, as a result of the hard work that CDNs put in, so that people can sort of start to visualize like some of these services. It's like, okay, you know what? I'm not going to roll this up myself. Let me go out to, let me knock on Robin's door over at Akamai.
Which is a good thing, but it's becoming more and more that's the only option to get these new things.
Got it.
And that is not a good thing, in my opinion.
Right.
So,
the lesson here is that, HTTP is the protocols are complicated, certainly, especially as they get where they're at right now. And it also sounds like, do you think that there'll ever be a moment where people will be able to roll up their own H2 or H3?
Oh, sure. Like, especially H2. H2 is pretty well doable by now. Even though, as I've discussed many times, there are still very bad stacks out there as well. They get it wrong in terms of performance. The thing there is that you can run HTTP3 right now But the problem is a lot of those advanced features, the really performance impacting features that your users will notice, are way more difficult to set up yourself. And you need support from CDN or a big hosting company to do that in a secure way, often, right? The typical example there is 0 RTT, right? One less round trip on the network, but the security implications of that are insane.
Wow.
To be able to do that in a proper way, and to do that yourself as a non-expert on the super low layer stuff is difficult. So you will get H3 deployments that people themselves do, which work fine, but they will still be less fast or less using all of the capabilities than the CDN hosted versions.
Got you. Now back to the chapter. What is something? I don't know if there was any kind of shocking moment in your discoveries. Although I feel like you're exposed to this kind of traffic on a daily level, so maybe you're not so shocked. Or is there something that you'd love to see for next year's chapter? Either or.
Yeah. So I didn't just look at HTTP as a protocol. We also look at some higher level features that influence how HTTP does its job. Things like link rel preload or pre-connects.
Right.
Things like what we call resource hints, right? And especially things like the fetch priority API. So you can now add fetch priority high or low to specific elements on the page, which like bumps how early they are requested or how much bandwidth they get on the HTTP connection.
Yes.
Right. And fetch priority API specifically is something that's been in the works for a long time. You might remember this used to be called priority hints.
Oh, yes.
I think already back in 2018, 2019. Tried to get that going, kind of fizzled, right? Google had a prototype, didn't really give the results they wanted, so it kind of went away, which was very frustrating for me because that was like one of my main topics in my PhD. And I was showing, there are tons of problems with this, and fetch priority is something we really need. And then they're like, oh no, we're not going to do that. So, and so I was so happy that they revamped that, like, what was it, 2 years ago, 3 years ago? And that it's now in. And so the thing that was surprising to me, looking at the data, is that let me look it up so I get it right. I think it's 26. Yeah, 26% of all the pages uses fetch priority today. 26. Last year it was 7. That was very surprising to me. That a new API that is, I wouldn't say it's complex, but it influences very complex things. That can find such a massive uptake in a year's time. It's a real validation of the work that people like Barry Pollard, for example, have been doing in developer advocacy and writing blog posts and putting out excellent content. That this really reaches developers, and people really start using it often as it's intended.
Amazing.
So that was very surprising to me and very validating as well, because I'm very happy that we finally have this. It's now also finally in Safari and Firefox as well, since a couple of months ago. And so we can now finally use this very powerful feature, and people are doing it. That was great. And even better, that also surprised me, is that very few people are using it the wrong way. From my job, I often see the wrong examples, and I have this image in my mind that everybody is doing it wrong, and this is a massive problem. It turns out it's like, some cases just 0.9%, which is fine, which is great. It's good that people are getting it right. So yeah, happy surprise, I would say, on that.
Yeah, that's awesome. There is that sort of history of sometimes people doing the quote unquote copy pasta, into their code base, and they're just assuming that it's just going to work on its own even if they don't, or even if they're not clear about how it works. But speaking of advocacy, speaking of Barry, who's actually in the chat, going on with his usual advocacy. So Barry, thank you for your service. But the last thing I was actually going to say about the HTTP chapter is, oh my God, I had it in my mind and now I'm forgetting. Whatever, it'll come back to me. And Barry waves, so we can just wave back. But so here's, I think, again, I'm asking quickly, what is something that you'd like to see potentially happen, or data that you'd like to really sort of clamp onto and look at again next year?
Yeah, so there was this weird situation where, because of the discovery of HTTP 3, you will have situations where the page starts loading on HTTP 2, browser discovers it supports 3, opens an HTTP 3 connection while it's loading, and then switches to HTTP 3 while that's going on, which messes with all kinds of RUM metrics and protocol comparisons and stuff. And I would like to get a better view on how often that happens in practice, which we try to do this year. We have a little bit of that, but not quite as much as I wanted. And then the second thing is JavaScript modules.
Okay.
So JS module and module preload specifically, where we saw some interesting things this year. And I didn't really know it was going to be that interesting, so I didn't ask Barry for additional queries on that. But now I know for next year we might look at that, because there's a lot of interesting semantics around loading of JS modules that are better than things that people might typically be using now. So I'd love to look more into that next year.
Awesome. And as usual, I think I dropped in the link to the HTTP chapter, which I did. I mean, not that you can click it right here, but it's over in the comment section. So if you want to go check it out, by all means. Now, I mean, Max, I want to come to you now, especially because it is late Central Eastern time. So I'd love to give you an opportunity to jump in and talk about the chapter that you authored or co-authored.
Yeah, and we're talking privacy now.
Yeah, and which came up with Robin, so that's why I thought it'd be a nice segue into your content.
Oh yeah. We weren't looking that much deep as to go to some network leaks, maybe. Yeah, but I think this year we the metrics showed us that we went right way, getting the SQL much deeper, the analysis, and our crawlers also to collect various custom metrics that showed us a lot of true privacy story. And I would say it happened to be much better compared to the last year, 2022, because now we having access to like a true metrics. But actually the privacy was doing a lot of cookie analysis. Obviously, it's like about third parties. Again, Yash participating in all chapters, maybe. Yeah, so there's a lot of intersection, and it's very nice. It's very nice because we now have a full-blown cookie chapter, and this is a mature topic to look about. Yeah, why didn't we have a separate chapter before? I don't know, but yeah, who knows?
Yeah,
and
I mean,
now
it's
a
the reason
more
why.
structured way into the privacy metrics, and we've developed a number of those. So yeah, about the compliance, about the frameworks, about the various methods of avoiding the restrictions in the privacy space. Yeah.
So, if I were to sort of like step back for a hot second, again, imagine someone's watching the stream right now and they're like, okay, I think I know about privacy. I feel like I'm being a good sort of like net citizen or whatnot.
Yeah.
What would you want to tell someone just at a high level, like why privacy is important to sort of, sort of like, uh, study, and why is it important to look at the data just on a whole?
Yeah. So on a whole, I think it starts with you being a good citizen, expecting people building websites being also good citizens, and playing a fair game here. You browsing and visiting websites, participating with a limited amount of information coming from your device, coming from your persona, and not participating in some monetization of yourself as a person, which you don't expect. And that comes, I think, somewhere in the area we started back early, like in 2020. Just is the privacy policy there on the website? Yeah. Now it's much deeper into the area, like, is the website is running some fingerprinting, just collecting bunch of signals from your device and to try to identify you on this website and on that and totally different website, and connect and learn about your behavior and like what are you doing around the web. And these big platforms can do that. And there's a lot of legal agenda today, obviously coming from GDPR to today's space where companies on the internet feel pressure and they develop frameworks and relationships between each other based on technology, so that there is a good way to let you know what data is collected about you, who has access to you, and actually make it work in a reliable and transparent way. And there are this is the right direction, I think, in terms of development. So reading the chapter, you can know how many people participate in driving this direction. Obviously, a lot of things are developed in Google as well, and adoption is driven by Google. But that's for you being a good citizen to learn about and to try to avoid. Yeah, obviously there are like ad blockers and things that can block some things, and we also show I think this was the first year that we got mature measurements to be able to give back to the community, actually. So from HTTP archive to generate the insight that actually can support blocking the bad behavior. Yeah, the most prominent one, definitely. So to protect actually the web users by by blocking those players.
So if you were to, and again, put yourself in a situation where you're speaking to someone who has moderate understanding of what privacy is right now, what would be like a data point that you'd love to sort of share with them and say, hey, let me give you like a really basic example, but this is how important it is. And this is something obviously that you would have shared in your chapter in the Web Almanac.
Yeah. So I think I put it in the highlights of the chapter. One of the first things, Facebook is one of the big players in this data sharing or data tracking market. And they've been, they're like on the second place after Google in the web. And they had their third-party cookie number 3 in terms of popularity. And that means that they can easily, without any effort, connect your activity across, I don't remember the number, like maybe 1/4 of the internet.
Wow.
25% of websites, whenever you visit them, whenever you go between these websites, they track your activity between all of them, but just because it all linked to this cookie that is placed on their domain, yeah, and it always is connected because these websites have connection to Facebook too. And it was in 2022, and this year we saw that they went like, I don't know, I cannot say how low in terms of third-party cookies. They're almost not present in the third-party cookie space, and they are prominent like number 3 in first-party cookie space. So they removed this connection in terms of cookie, yeah, from you and your behavior across the website, and it was driven by all these efforts from starting from Apple now to Google, pushing back on third-party cookies. So your behavior is less visible for them. It requires much more effort, requires much more your proactive consent to be given them. Yeah, without that, it's impossible today. Yeah, and I think this is one of the prominent highlights of the insights.
Awesome. You know, and it's a chapter that, again, I was kind of skimming through, and I realized how, again, getting back to the web, and how on one hand it is relatively wonderful, but on the other hand, you know, the complicated nature of things like privacy right now, and some of the chapters that we'll get into in a hot moment, it's definitely good to sort of like read about, and so that people understand what it is, hopefully, that they're sort of like engaging into. You know, what is something that, you know, that you may not have tackled this year, or some research that you'd like to sort of see covered in next year's privacy chapter, if anything at all?
I think I hope there's going to be more collaboration with the ad blocking communities, because they have vast knowledge collected for where this bad behavior occurs. Yeah, and we've been using some of the repositories with this knowledge in our studies. And I hope we'll be able to uncover more and work in with this data in a structured way, scalable way. So, and a second community is, or it's actually organization, is International Advertising Bureau, that powers all of some good intentions, I hope, driving the privacy space also in the advertising. So they're developing. There is a tech department of this bureau that leads development of the frameworks, and this, I think, the direction where all the good citizens developing the technology for the web should follow and should be compliant with. And uncovering more insights in terms of what are the best practices and what are the best scenarios, or like the benefits for the web companies moving forward with that, so that we can, from the privacy perspective, also show the good example. The companies can learn the best practices in terms of privacy, because we've been kind of taking a bit negative approach, just showing like the bad actors before, I think. And I hope that the next year we can show actually the best practice scenarios and the good citizens building the websites for us.
Awesome. I mean, I'm definitely looking forward to that, simply because, you know, and again, I've realized that, you know, how important privacy is, and how they've been able to sort of, you know, use technologies to track us entirely. Like you said, you know, a quarter of the web, you know, we can be traced back to at least like 25% of the web, which is absolutely insane considering the size and scope of the web. Yeah, it's always funny because at times I'm wondering if they're actually reading my mind, because recently I was like, oh man, I want to build my own bed frame. And then I was thinking of like buying some wood, and then suddenly there was an ad for some wood. And I was like, I had to look around and
It's an
say, like,
oddly specific ad. Was it like a particular type of wood, or they're like, hey, 2x4s, Home
like
Depot?
2x4s. Like I was actually thinking of 2x4s, and 2x4s showed up on my screen. I was like, what is going on? Anyhow, I mean, I want to.
What you want from technology.
I know, right? I'm just like, one day I'm just going to be sitting there.
No,
like
they
this.
need to follow you everywhere, read your dreams, and then build an AI model on you.
Yeah. So, they don't want to get into my dreams, believe me.
Yeah.
But I did want to say this. Barry put in this little statement for you, Max, saying that you joined as a maintainer at the HB Archive, and your work is absolutely valued, of course. So shout outs to Max, and shout out to Barry for dropping that statement in the comments. Giving you flowers, as we like to say around my block.
Barry deserves all the flowers. He edited everyone's chapter that's here. Every one of us.
Absolutely. Like, let's get his address and send him a bouquet, several bouquets, in fact. So, Barry, thanks for joining us in the chat today. So it's well appreciated.
Great to have you, Barry.
I feel like the flow has been really good because we've gone into these chapters that were like interconnected, and now we're going to get into something absolutely special. A privacy expert who's going to talk about third parties. Yash, how you doing, man? Thanks for being patient.
Good, all good.
You know what I mean? So, and I'm mentioning the privacy bit because I know Yash and I got on a call, and he was wowing me with some data about some, I don't want to call them bad actors, but they're not winning awards. I'll say that much. So Yash, man, third parties. Tell us about third parties from even a privacy perspective, because you have been doing some deep studies in that space. So the floor is yours.
So when a user visits any website on the internet, that is referred to as first party. And then any entity which is actually embedded by the first party or by any other entity on that website, that is a third party. And the obvious thing from the privacy perspective is that user trusts the first party website that they're visiting. And the assumption is that all the third parties which are embedded on a website, they are trusted by the first party. But the privacy breach happens when those third parties try to do some form of tracking of the user in order to re-identify the user or track their behavior or activities across different websites. So I think that's where privacy and third parties have that interconnect. From the perspective of Web Almanac, this is my first year on HTTP Archive. So it was kind of new to me, all of this at the beginning. Max was a great supporter, and he helped through a lot of things to ramp up of how things work here. And we tried to focus third parties chapter in terms of try to maintain the same kind of analysis from 2021 and 2022 so that we can draw comparisons of where the web is in its current state versus how it was back then. Yeah.
And so again, back to my sort of, positioning as to you're explaining this to someone who's, just barely sort of like briefed on the matter. What is some information that you'd love to share with that person, or now that you kind of talked about in your chapter?
So we do the analysis in our chapter in 3 different parts. We first look at the prevalence of different third parties. Then we look at distribution of the kind of third parties that are included on a website. And finally, we look at the inclusion chains. Because as I said before, it is not necessarily that the first party website that the user is visiting embeds or includes a third party website. It could be included by other third parties as well. So we do that inclusion chain analysis. And in terms of numbers, we observe around 92% of pages um, to include third party on the first party website that the user is visiting, which is in consistency with the numbers in 2021 and 2022. But if we look at a median level, the number of third parties that were observed to be embedded in different categories of websites. And when I say categories, I mean like rank of websites, top 10K websites versus million websites. Those numbers, we do see an increase. So there are more third parties being included now as compared to the number of median number of third parties being included in 2022 or 2021.
So, when you see that kind of trend, how would you explain that? Is this, are you, and I guess this might include, your private, you might have to wear your privacy hat here, which is pretty much what you have to wear these days, it seems. But when you see an increase in the median jumping up in third parties, like what is that telling you initially?
So there are more third parties included. We also look at the categories of these third parties. And we observe that consent providers, video platforms, and customer success are the top three categories by prevalence that we observe in terms of third party categorization. So probably consent providers explain that there are more stricter privacy regulations that are coming in, like Max mentioned about GDPR. There is state regulations in US, like CCPA in California, and other states also have started building their own regulations around privacy. So probably there are these consent providers which are included to gather consent more accurately from the user and then abide by those consent or translate that consent information to other third parties which are included. So we observed an increase in those kind of platforms. But yeah, from the privacy perspective, if I have to look at it, there are definitely more third parties included. It simply means that there are more third parties who have access to that user's information. So if that same third party, which is included on, let's say, A.com, is also included on B.com, then they have information about your browsing on both A and B websites.
So, with the sort of, as you mentioned just previously, there, these third parties that are just basically there to, provide consent, and things like that. If you were to remove this sort of like need for this kind of third party, are there others that are basically not, what we would expect to see in today's sort of web? Meaning, are we seeing more aggressive third party activity from first party sites? If that made any sense.
From first party?
So basically, like if, say, for example, I don't know, let's take NewYorkTimes.com. And, between 21, 22, and say this year, we're seeing like a sharp rise, but it's not necessarily them sort of, it's not necessarily third parties that are basically there to say, hey, do you accept X, Y, and Z? And you do your like, yeah, include all, whatever. Are we seeing like other third parties that are just sites being a bit more aggressive in the kind of information that they're trying to collect from you?
So I don't think that was part or in scope of this year's analysis, but there has been some research which has focused on understanding if the user is providing consent, whether it's accept all or reject all, is that consent appropriately translated to different third parties which are embedded, and are those third parties following or respecting the user's consent choices? And it has been found that they are not. Like whatever consent has been provided, that has been translated, but that has not been respected by the respective third parties in all scenarios. So it is a concern from the privacy standpoint. In terms of inclusion, I mentioned previously, we do look at if a given third party which is included on a given page, if they further include any other third party. And then we kind of looked at the entire chain of inclusion. And we observed that around 14% of such inclusion chains were of length more than 5. So it means that there was entity including other entity, including another entity, up till 5 hops or more. And I think most of the inclusion chains of like highest length were observed to be associated with games category. So probably there are a lot of third-party resources needed to provide good user experience to the gamer who is trying to play some games online, and maybe that's why they are doing. Or it could be that they are doing more sort of from privacy perspective, there are more tracking third parties embedded.
Wow. I did not realize, I mean, full disclosure, I'm not a gamer, folks. Apologies. Save your slander, though. But I did not realize that gamers, there's a lot of third parties involved in providing a good gaming experience. I did not know that at all. So I guess this is something that, hey, sounds like a new chapter in the third party or even privacy, but probably third party chapter, I guess. That's a sort of, have a good idea of how that works.
And that's I think the place for us to make space for advertising chapter, because everything is built dependent on the monetization capabilities, which is in gaming huge. Yeah, so I think actually Yash did write a big piece of chapter we didn't include this year in privacy, related to all of these relationships and third parties can participating in advertising kind of life cycle. I hope we'll find a place for it next year.
We did include it in security chapter briefly this year.
Cool. Yeah, I like that it's found a way somewhere. Yeah, but we'll dive into that. The multi-layered structure of web, and that some of these layers can be uncovered.
Yeah,
that has a direct impact on the privacy and security and performance, everything.
Wow. And definitely on the third party and performance, that link has been, made like for years and years and years. And I've always been very curious as to why I've not yet seen, or maybe it's out there and I've just not had the chance to sort of like read the documentation and or watch the talk. But the third party and performance talk, and like you talked about, like the multiplicity of hops that take place once you say, okay, yeah, sure, I'll do it, and it's like you see all the hops. What was that tool by Robin, you'll probably remember. I'm trying to remember Simon's tool. What is it called? You know what I'm talking about. Yes.
Request map.
Yeah, request map. There's this tool out there that kind of shows you some of these hops that take place, under the hood that you're not aware of, and things like that. So, but that's amazing. So it sounds like you have some chapters. You have some written, material that potentially didn't make this final version of the archive. The Almanac. Hopefully, I'm assuming that this is something that we'll be able to work on and read for next year. Is that correct, Yash? Am I putting words into your mouth?
No, I mean, we don't know, like Max said, if we are to include a new chapter on advertising, then maybe the analysis that I did on that part, which was more related to different standards that IAB has introduced and how they interplay, and how different relationships exist between different advertising entities, including publishers, advertisers, and ad exchanges. And so that analysis more fits in line with advertising chapter if we were to include that. But other than that, from the third party chapter's perspective, one thing that Max suggested I would like to add on that, wherein many of the third parties are now being included in the first party context. So these third party scripts, when they exist in an iframe, and then they set some cookie, let's say, so those are third party cookies. But if that third party script is present in line in the mainframe, and then they set some cookies, then those cookies are apparently owned by the first party website that the user is visiting. So it technically is like a third party is acting as a first party or is present in a first party context, which gives them capability to track a user on that same website. But then the identifiers, like first party identifiers that Max mentioned from Facebook, which is an FBP cookie, so they can set those cookies and then do everything in the first party context. And I think we wanted to include this analysis wherein we wanted to understand what is the source of embedding or inclusion of a given third party on a page. So whether those third parties are embedded inside an iframe versus mainframe, and that is some analysis that we left out, we did not end up completing, but that would be something that relates to first party, that relates to privacy chapter, and would be a nice additional information on how these third parties are functioning.
That is absolutely awesome. I mean, it looks like we have a good chunk of the that chapter already written up. So that's good to see. Man, fascinating. And again, it's unfortunate that we've not been able to have our guest author from the cookies chapter, because again, I just saw the interplay between third-party privacy and cookies, and how that could even be its own sort of like separate talk or presentation. But very important material to sort of cover. And again, folks, these chapters are all available in the Almanac, and you'll be able to read them over at your own pace and understand exactly what it is that the web, or how it is the web is being built in present day. That being said, with all the fun we've had, it's been like an hour already, so that's actually really good, and more or less on schedule for what I had in mind. So before sort of like making my own closing statement for today, I'd like to sort of like go around and again, I think I've asked this already, but what are we looking at in terms of a 2025 wish list, or things you'd like to see or do yourself next year? Jamie, if you're going to participate, or if you'd like to, in terms of the content you'd like to see in any particular chapters, but obviously your own. And Jamie, I'll start with you.
I would like Ash's chapter, please, and thank you. That would be lovely.
You'd like to, pardon me? Sorry.
I would like Ash's chapter, the one that he's talking about for next year. I would like to see that, please, and thank you.
Okay, well, there you go.
That's my wish list right there.
We have the first request made. Max, I'll move to you.
I would like to see a great team, more experts than this year. We've been writing privacy this year, I think 7 people.
Mm-hmm.
That was a really good learning from each other. And I would really like to see the Web Almanac going a bit more interactive, because I hate writing. I like I like playing with charts, and dashboards, and I take so much time to write. But we are trying to put in words what can be shown with really nice chart, and people can read it themselves. I don't know. That's how I like to read the data. So interactive.
Absolutely. You know what? I agree with that, and again, I think we spoke yesterday, the day before, part of the reason why I wanted to sort of like spin up these streams is so that we can have these conversations that just don't really tend to come out on paper. You know what I mean? Like, you can sit and read and read and read, but it's always a little different when you have like a bit of a conversation around the material that's been covered. And the other thing that I did want to mention, and you sort of like alluded to that, folks, the Web Almanac is always open to new authors, and new ideas for chapters. So if you do have any requests or something that you'd like to see covered, I don't know if Barry's still in the chat, if he wants to put in his own little credentials so that you can reach out to him. But, at the very least, you could probably message the HP Archive on LinkedIn, I think still Twitter, I think Blue Sky, I believe. You can get their attention that way. And tune the web in most places. Here he is, Barry. So if you want to maybe, again, volunteer and be an author.
Join in, and you'll be able to analyze 25 million websites next year together with us to get just some insights you've been looking for.
Absolutely. And by the way, to all the authors, feel free, if you care, to you can leave your contact information in the chat, so that or the comment section. So if people want to reach out to you for questions or advice or whatnot, so by all means. That being said, Robin, closing words from your end, something like you see to next year, just in general, that you've not even mentioned before.
Apparently, I can't request extra things because Barry won't let me. But in general, I was very happy with what we have this year. We already did a bunch more than I would have hoped to do. The general thing I hope for next year is that more people visit the site. So we have some analytics, and they're lower than I would like to see, because this is a ridiculously good resource. Like, this is not just the data that you present, but a lot of the chapters are really like learning capabilities about everything that exists, even without the data that we have. Even without that, it would just be a very good resource just to learn about the web, as we said before. So I would love to see more people be aware of this and join. And this kind of live stream is obviously a very good first effort, Ori, so thank you for that.
That's the least I can do,
But I really hope we can keep this going for years on end, and this becomes like the go-to resource for not just the data, but also the learning of the cutting edge stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I always liken this document, the Web Almanac, to this amazing book. And I wanted to make sure that, it didn't just live on the library shelf. I wanted it to be sort of like exposed like this, and have the authors come out and talk about the chapters and the findings. And again, just some of that information that you just can't relate sometimes in a written document. But yeah, it's the least that I could do. Yash, something, I know you just spoke about it, but any wish list for next year, or things that you'd like to do, be more involved, apparently?
I think I was pretty involved in terms of, like, I was part of 2 chapters, but and that was more than sufficient.
That is so much.
Yeah.
2 chapters. We need more authors, all right, y'all?
Yeah.
We definitely, like, there are many people as part of a chapter, but then not most of them are working, and it becomes very difficult to see the progress. So I think that's the same story for everyone. But apart from that, I think, advertising chapter that I mentioned would be interesting. And as a researcher, maybe like I've like myself used, and I've also seen others using statistics quoted in the chapters being used in the research papers. So I think they had included the citations this time, like the citable format of the chapter. But yeah, I think that was something I was looking forward to at the beginning of this year.
Awesome. All right. Good to hear. And, last but not least, the Arten Senna fan, Mikael. We spoke about this a couple of days ago, folks, so it's an inside joke. But yeah, man, what is something that you'd like to see next year in terms of, like, either your involvement or chapters, or some information that you think would be awesome to read?
Well, I definitely will try to participate more early, because this year the train was already in movement. And I will try to convince more people, for example, in Brazil, to localize this content. I believe that at least in Latin America, we have very good professionals and I'm already talking with some of them in terms of SEO, data, etc., to try to localize this content and spread these discussions, such as discussion that we take it today about third-party cookies, security, etc. More people need to be aware about that and more engaged, and spread this information to their communities. Definitely.
Awesome. Good to hear. So, folks, I do once again want to thank each and every one of you for spending some time with us today and being able to talk about your chapters at the in the Web Almanac and sharing that. So, I do want to again remind everyone that they can check out the Web Almanac on their own. I sent a link earlier in the chat. The last one I sent got a little weird, so I'm not going to drop that again. But before closing everything out, I want to thank again everyone for joining us, and I'm just going to remove everyone one by one slowly. So, Jamie, thank you. I'm going to remove you. I'm going to remove Robin and Yash and Mikael. And in the next few minutes, I just want to remind everyone again. It's been spoken about before, but the contributions to the Web Almanac are definitely valued. If you're curious about the Almanac, I know Barry was in there and he dropped his information, so you can check him out on most places. So that includes X. No, I didn't say X. I meant Twitter. No, it's actually X now. I think he's on Blue Sky as well. I'm pretty sure you can find him under Barry Pollard on LinkedIn. And if I'm missing a platform, I do want to apologize. Place is a little fragmented these days. And the other thing I'm going to mention, and I think it was talked about briefly, but maybe if I share my screen, I'm hoping that it's actually still there. Share screen. Yes, I know. Where am I going to go? Window. I don't want that. I don't want that. Do I want a Chrome tab? Okay, just give me one quick second as I do some magic here. Almanac, and I go here, and I'm going to try to share the screen again. I do want to apologize. I should have had this set up. Share screen. Yes, I know. Chrome tab. There we go. So this is what. Whoa, am I here? Okay, there we go. This is what I want to share. And one of the things that did come up is the idea of being able, and I talked about it last time, but let's say we go to a chapter like, I don't know, let's go to performance. And one of the things that I want to talk about in terms of, when you're reading the chapter, whichever one that's interesting to you, you'll have charts like these, right? And something like Good Core Vitals on mobile. The one thing that I want people to realize is that they can actually hit the little menu with the three little dots, and they can actually look at the data as it was pulled off the web. So all of this is available to you to read in finite detail, and this is the kind of data that was used to write the chapters. Now, I can go back, and beyond that, you could actually, if you want to look at use the image, say on a blog post or on a deck that you're presenting either at a conference or internally at work, you can do that as well because it's totally available. And the last thing I want to say, and one of the more important ones and really interesting, you could actually look at the query that was used. All right. And you could take the whole thing and rerun it. Now, disclaimer, that means you're probably going to go through a bazillion sites and your wallet might explode because, it does cost some money to go through all this data. But you can edit these queries so that it fits your possible needs, right? So you can truncate the query, you could run it full blown. And that's really the case with every single image, I believe, where you'll be able to look at the data points and look at the query in the entire chapter. So just keep that in mind. There is so much that you can look at here. And again, you can use some of this data to fit and suit your own needs internally at work. You're looking at client work. I don't know what it might be, but that's how amazing this the Almanac is. And I felt that was a little known feature and detail at the Almanac. So I want to highlight that. Whew. All right. So that being said, I do want to thank everyone who tuned in today. This is part 2 of the Web Almanac Live. Is there going to be a part 3? I'm not sure yet. I've sort of put it out there because there's, I think, one chapter that's remaining that hasn't been published yet, which is the JavaScript chapter. So if that gets published, we'll look into it. That being said, thank you very much. I'm going to try to create some content out of this this extended stream, chop it up into little, comestible bits. And beyond that, I think that's it. Thank you very much and have yourself a great day.